And with that, it is the end of pre-season. Okay, it's a little dramatic, I know, but that will be it. The last practice game we get to see before the start of the 2025 football season. Yes, we have opening round and a bunch of matches and players that we get a good line of sight on. But for these two teams, this is it. Which Dees stood out? There's a couple that have popped, a couple that did not. While from a Fremantle perspective, they look like they're going to be running hot to start their 2025 season. Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. Thanks so much for tuning in on this series. We do hope you've enjoyed our look as we've broken down every single one of these community series games. Not really focused on the fantasy or SuperCoach scoring that much, but where are the roles, combinations, and the players that have dictated our structures both now and moving forward. Let's talk about the players that were missing in this game. Again, so critical and vital for us to know these components, because otherwise we might find ourselves getting tripped and trapped and all those T words when it comes to ourselves falling over and really believing something that wasn't there. Probably the most notable absence, really Fremantle, the only team that had absentees despite an early injury to a Jacob Van Rooyen for Melbourne, is Hayden Young. It sounds like he's going to miss round one, could be back as early as round two. We'll wait and see. And Nat Fyfe, you probably need to throw his name into the ring here. Multiple-time Brownlow medalist. Yes, he's right towards the back half of his AFL career, but on his day, he's still more than capable of putting the team on his shoulders for a quarter or two. So they're probably the two that are missing, which have some midfield mix challenges. Let's move away from Fremantle for a moment and let's talk about the Demons. Max Gawn is where I would like to start. I could have started with 4 or 5 different names. I feel like Melbourne gave us so much incredible stuff. During the preseason on an episode of the 50 Most Relevant where we talked about Max, I made the statement that if I was spending over $1 million in AFL Fantasy or that 600K plus in SuperCoach for any ruckman, this is the guy I want. I know that's controversial when you've got a Tristan Cherry in and around that price range, but I really want my hands on a Max Gawn over Cherry. Yeah, I know taking that ownership gauntlet is scary and crazy, but for me, this was exactly what Max Gawn is. His run to start last year was undeniably brilliant, and he did slow as the year went on. But there's a couple of things I like about Max. Number one, clear and supreme number one ruck in his team and his ecosystem. Yes, I know Xavier got himself hurt. Tom Campbell's not coming in to fix that. You've got a Tom McDonald type that's more than likely to do that. They're running around with options like a Disco Turner. Jefferson has still not got opportunities and has been banging the door down. This is not the way that Tom Campbell comes into the side. And even if he did, right, Gawn is so dominant that he bullied Liam Reidy. He actually made Luke Jackson really work hard around the ground. To me, I think Max Gawn's the number one ruck this year. I'm just that confident on it. Everything I saw last year, I saw again in this match. I know what he is. I know that he can score across all of the elements. And I think the thing that tips in his favour for me, in contrast to maybe other top-end premium rucks, is I love his fixture. Go and check it out. Rounds like 5 to 9 is extraordinary for him. And it's not too bad over the first month as well, whereas the others, the English, the Cherries, it's a little bit more harder to manage. I know we've faded our interest as a community in Rowan Marshall without seeing him in the preseason, and understandably so. But I'm of the belief that if you're going to start any top-end ruck, the fixture and the pedigree would indicate that Gawn is the way to go. It's a bold, big call, I know, and it's no knock on Cherry. I just think over the first 8 weeks of the year, the first 9 weeks of the year, I think Gawn is going to return better value for money. And I'm just going to back that in. You can disagree with it. And that's the beauty of the coaches panel, right? You don't have to agree. That's the beauty here is we make opinions, we make statements. and then give you information to make your own decision. So if you're like, nah, MJ, you're crazy. It's English season. It's all about Tristan Cherry. Back it in with your selection. That's all I would say. Don't make a big call and then not back it in. For me, probably going to be backing that statement in, as you'll see when later this week I drop my best 22 or 23 for SuperCoach. Before opening round edition, I will drop that for you. And I'm looking forward to sharing it with you. Max Gawn, I think he's probably one of the big talking points from this game. But he's not the only one. We do have to talk about Christian Petracca. There was some concern that maybe he'd get eased into this game. But look, 33 touches, a couple of shots on goal, and the third most centre bounces of all players in the game at 57%. Outstanding. Yes, we need to take the consideration of what the game was, which was, it was quite open for big chunks of this game, but I think that favours the narrative about why you could select Christian Petracca. So damaging up forward when he was there, but he wasn't so exclusively forward that he didn't get invested and involved around the ground. He'd push up, become the fourth and fifth midfield option. His ownership across the formats is ridiculous. Like ridiculous. He's a perennial 115 plus average performer in SuperCoach and always around that 105 marker in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team. And he's priced with unbelievable value inside him. Yes, he's always going to have that mid-forward split about him. Whether it'll be enough to pick up dual position status, it has to be at this first block of games. Otherwise, the season-long data is probably going to go against him. But to me, I'd love a slightly higher 50-50 split, not what was almost 60-40, but a 60-40, or in this case, a 57 split in the mid. Almost is on that line of him getting DPP status. So let's watch and wait and see. I love him as a unique. I think he's going to be a great option. SuperCoach has always been his more favoured game than AFL Fantasy, but if you want a guy that's going to knock the door of the top end and do it with great value and create some separation in your starting squad, if you're feeling like your forward line, your ruck line, your defensive line, it's like, I just look like every other team, maybe Track could be your pathway there. A Track over a Rosie, a Track over a Dawson, a Track over a Taranto. Not saying you should do that, but saying this is the sort of 50-50 choices that you could and should be making. As Christian Petracca spent a lot more time in the midfield of this game, I was intrigued to see what his teammate Trent Rivers would do. A lot of midfield time in the first third or so of the game, 30% centre bounces across the entirety of the game. But it became evidently clear that with Track going in there and an Ed Langdon, that I think it's now time to fade a Trent Rivers. He looked a class above at times when he was around the ball, does kick the ball way more than he handballs, which we do love that more from a fantasy perspective, given that it's going to be more favourable for us from a scoring perspective. But I think this midfield mix now, while it looks really well distributed in terms of names, with Oliver, Viney and Track back up at that high percentage ratio, he's now the fourth and fifth option. And he frankly was always going to be, but I think there was hope in the community that maybe he would leapfrog a Track and he would spend more time forward. But the reality is Langdon squeezing in there has really just thinned him out now down to the fifth option, it seems. So as a result, yes, he looked good. Yes, he looks great. But I'm not sure you could do that, because the other thing that Melbourne have done alongside this is they've ballooned out their wings a little bit. Like, we didn't see much of Sharp, but he's a great runner. Lindsay, I thought, looked excellent in this game. Yeah, we'll talk about Xavier. So Trent Rivers, to me, I think he's a hard fade now, in my opinion. You've got others in and around this price range that have clearer and defined roles. And the competition of how they're going to get their ball is much more defined than what I think Trent's will be. So, time to move on. Clayton Oliver was outstanding in this game, just simply outstanding. The run was back, the work rate was back, the energy in and around the group. These are the things we are wanting to see. Yes, he's so highly owned across the formats, it does feel a little redundant to talk about him, but maybe you've been shaking on the selection because others in the price range have really emerged throughout this community series. Or maybe there's just the demons, no pun intended, of last year that is starting to impact your selection decisions. Lock this one in. No, he will not kick multiple goals like he did in this game, but he was absolutely brilliant. And that was done off only a 50% centre bounce split. I can see that increasing in guys like Pickett, like Rivers, getting even less, let alone an Ed Langdon getting even less, as he just continues to build that synergy back with his team and that confidence back in his body that he's going to do what he's done so often in his career. Make life easy for yourself. This is not a place for separation. Lock it in. And if it goes pear-shaped in the early portion of the season, and by pear-shaped I mean he only goes an 80s, which he won't do, by the way, barring injury, is you parachute out of him. This is not where you try to diverge and separate. This is the guy that you stay with the pack, and then if someone pops at a comparable or cheaper price point that you like what they're delivering, jump on board. But to me, I just don't see a pathway where he's not going to be 100 mid for us in fantasy and leaping over that 110 territory in SuperCoach. And that's probably more at the conservative end, because history would say he's probably got another 10 points on top of that if he is back to his best. And he looked pretty darn good. Harvey Langford, I should talk about him. He's been a popular bench stash option. Spent a lot of time forward in this game. That's probably handy for us in one regards, because he's going to pick up forward status with that level of splits. Still think he's going to debut in the round one side, so you can continue that selection with confidence. The challenge for us is going to absolutely be, do we have better rookies with better scoring capacity at a cheaper price point than him? I think his job security is absolutely brilliant. A game like this was quite fast-paced, lots of transition, the ball just zooming around an absolute ton, and a lot of that had to do with how Fremantle wanted to play the game with pace on the ball. That's not really Langford's style when you throw that variable in. And the fact he's forward a lot, yeah, it was kind of going against him a little bit. I think he could still proceed with a little bit of caution, not caution about his job security or his round one debut, but more around, are you going to get a better option that's going to get a better fantasy and SuperCoach scoring role? That would be the only factor I would say there. I do think his scoring is going to be a little bit roller coastery. He's going to have a little bit of down scoring there. But yeah, I'm happy if you selected him, especially if you've got the other really, really important rookies. Two more Dees we got to talk about. Two more. Ed Langdon, really simply, surprising the amount of centre bounces that he's picked up in this preseason. It does confirm the narrative coming out of the club and that he was spending a lot of time through centre bounce. Clearly, they're trying to add a little bit of speed and a different dynamic look beyond just Viney, Petracca, Oliver, and he is one of those important pieces. Classic relevant? Absolutely not. But on draft, maybe you're drafting this weekend in your Shiva draft, whatever it is, move him up your draft rankings a touch where historically he's been, depending on the size of your league, a waiver wire player pool pick or one of your last selected mids. I think you can afford to elevate him a couple of rounds. With him getting some centre bounce opportunities just means he's not going to get stuck on the wing as much, and he's going to be in and around the ball a little bit more. Does use it pretty well. They did like the ball in his hands when they're bringing some speed on the ball. He did get involved in transition scoring. If he's getting a little bit of stoppage scoring, which historically he hasn't really got much because he's been such an outside type of player, that might just beef him up, another 5, 6, 7 points per game, which again in draft, you'll absolutely take. The last demon I want to talk about is Xavier Lindsay. I'm such a fan of what this guy is. His decision-making with ball in hand, especially by foot, is absolutely elite. This guy is absolutely scary. If I had to pick one of Langford or Lindsay on my team, I would choose Lindsay because I think for two things. One, his role is around the ball a lot more, and I think his kicking adds something to their midfield dynamic that they do not have. Spent his game across the wing, and so there were moments and quarters where he's around the ball a lot, and then there were moments and quarters where he's doing a lot of running, covering a lot of territory, but not really getting involved from a scoring perspective. I love what he's going to be. I think he's definitely a bench option for you. Some might want to put him at M8. I think that's a little too high for me based on how I think your midfield might need to structure up. But definitely, I love his job security. I love his role. Contrast, I think his scoring will be comparable to what we saw Caleb Windsor do last year on the wing. I think that's that same sort of range. If you are happy with what Windsor did, you should be happy with what Lindsay is about to deliver for you. Let's talk about the Dockers. This may just be my longest episode because there's so many threads to pull out of this one. Andrew Brayshaw. I've been bullish on Andrew Brayshaw the entirety of this preseason. On multiple episodes here on this platform, I've made the statement that if I'm an AFL fantasy coach, I would start Andrew Brayshaw. I believe he is the number one mid for 2025. He's just the perennial 110 scorer, scores in a bunch of different ways. And to me, the absence of Hayden Young probably just means he's even more ball is going to come in and around through him. He offers something around that transition and ball movement that a Caleb Serong doesn't and others do not. I just love what he is. Scores so well. And the beautiful thing about this is, yeah, he popped a big SuperCoach score, so the SuperCoaches are going to be interested. But for AFL Fantasy, those that are tracking scoring over actual what happened in the game, they're just going to be like, he was fine. He didn't get massive amounts of ball. No, he didn't. But he was the clear number one centre bounce guy. Like, he had 77% of centre bounce presence. The very next best was Caleb Serong. And so absolutely dominating in this space. He is the M1 in AFL Fantasy. I think he offers awesome value in SuperCoach. And this will probably be the last time I don't say it, but I'll say it as if it is. Check out Fremantle's early fixture. I think you want one of Serong or Brayshaw in your starting squads for what they're going to do based on the opponents that they have. Probably should talk about Caleb Serong as well. This is exactly what you wanted and needed to see from Caleb as well. Much like an Andrew Brayshaw, we know what the role is. He did spend a little bit of time forward resting. We've seen that now in a couple of games. Kicked some goals. But I just love what he offers in and around the ground. For a guy who scores so much of his ball and his fantasy points and SuperCoach points through stoppage, for a game like this that was a high transition game, is really, really encouraging for us as well. We know what he can be, which is one of the most damaging premium midfielders. I think if you are on Caleb Serong before this game, probably the same with Andrew Brayshaw, this game just confirmed everything you needed to see. Yes, you might be a bit more concerned about the midfield forward split. Personally, I wouldn't. I see politely what is going on here. A bunch of experimentation for round one for who's going to step into the gap while Hayden Young's out of the side. Because we saw Matty Johnson getting 47%. We saw O'Driscoll, as the game went on, start to pick up more centre bounce presence. Erasmus getting it once he came on, let alone a Shai Bolton. Even a Murphy Reid is getting CBAs in this game. So I do feel like they're experimenting a lot with their combinations. But when the whips start cracking, it won't be a concern for me about what Caleb Serong is. Lock him in if you're bullish before this game. If you're not, that's totally fine. Just think you want a slice of what early Fremantle fixture. There's a couple of teams that have that early fixture that I want a piece of. It's Adelaide, it's Port Adelaide, it is Melbourne, and it is Fremantle. These are some teams that positionally, depending who you're looking at, have some fixtural things that make me say, yes, please. The other team that sits in that spot, Carlton. That's all I'm going to say. Next player I do want to talk about is Noddy. Yeah, Mini Monk. Sorry, I thought he's meant to appear every time you say Nathan O'Driscoll or Noddy. I could be wrong. We'll have to wait and see. Look, not a great first quarter. Not going to be honest. Really just found himself kind of a little bit around the ball, but not getting anywhere near the ball. Spent a lot of time on the wing early. And then as that midfield mix started to change in the second half, he was in that spot. I do think the absence of a Hayden Young for at least round one really benefits the potential scoring ceiling of a Nathan O'Driscoll, let alone prevents any chance of a sub vest coming his way. I love what he is going to be because he gets involved in transition. He impacts the scoreboard and he can get it done at centre bounce. This is absolutely somebody that I really like the look of. I know some people are a little bit hesitant. They'd rather an O'Sullivan. They'd rather an Ashcroft. They'd rather, depending on the format, Sheldrick, Sardis. There are a lot of options. Nevitt sits in this spot as well that are in a similar ecosystem of price point. To me, I throw all the variables and put them in a wall stack. I don't see how I fade a Nathan O'Driscoll politely. I've got these others that have sub concerns. I don't think he's got that. Others have got fixture matchups that don't look as favourable as I'd like them to be. They are. And there is an opportunity for a round one pop score without a Hayden Young. So to me, I'm very happy to run all in on it. Yes, he can go bad to start the year. But let's be honest, we will all have made a mistake in our starting squad. The reality is we just will. Now, that mistake might not be something that we forecast, but we'll make a mistake and we will have to do multiple correctional trades because a player that we didn't expect to pop has absolutely thrived. A guy that we were prepared to go against does what we didn't want them to do, and we need to correct course before we get too far away. Something is going to go wrong. And as long as you know that and you're comfortable with that, you can much more easily then confidently use those first 1, 2, 3, 4 trades, whatever it needs to be, to get your team back on track. And if I have to use Noddy as a correctional trade, I absolutely will. This one hurts a little bit. I was quite bullish on a Liam Reidy at R2. I thought the fixture was good. The lack of Shrek Sean Darcy was good for him. And the price point was unbelievable because what it allowed you to do, it really helped you fix up that depth issue that you had in your defensive line with him at R2. It meant you could pretty much kick every cash cow off your bench and get a slice of those top-end guys. You could run the midfield that you wanted, both whether it be premiums, high-value breakout mid-prices, and the more expensive rookies. It even let you have the option of getting 1 or 2 bites of the forward premiums in Rankin or Horne-Francis, as well as the suite of value. But based on that gain, I couldn't do it. Yes, he still did some nice things. So let's validate that. He had a greater centre bounce presence than what Luke Jackson did. Granted, it's only about 6% differential, but it's there. He did have more hit-outs than what Luke Jackson did, and we do need to qualify the opponent that he was going up against is one of, if not the greatest ruckman of the modern era. And so those variables do go against him, but that's not why I'm going to fade Liam Reidy. The reason I've lost a little bit of interest in him, certainly in AFL Fantasy now that at that 400k point, SuperCoach with the flex, okay, maybe a little more interest with the extra selection that sits through there. But he looked lost at times. Physically, while he's imposing by height, physically, Gawn just moved him with too much ease. Now, I know Gawn is a beast, but there was almost no resistance in his framework around it. Didn't really help around the ground, and if he couldn't take the mark, wasn't doing the things that the coach needs, which is bring the ball to ground at your feet, get your teammates involved in the game. So hit-outs, yes, he looked okay, but the statistical lines of everything else is single digits for tackles. 1 tackle, 1 mark, 1 kick. And I think that was via a free kick that he got that one, by the way. And just the 2 handballs. So I just don't know if you can go there. I know there's been some intrigue about it, but to me, the answer is just, I'm sorry, Liam, it's not me, it's you. It's over. The dream, it's done of Reidy at R2. Hey, last 2 dockers we've got to talk about before we wrap up this episode. Neil Erasmus. I know we desperately want this to work because everything at a junior and a waffle level screams fantasy stud. I just don't know if this guy's has got what it takes to break it now into the AFL system. From a skill set and from a speed set, he's just not adding anything to a team that is clearly wanting to move the ball high on a skill level. He was pinging the ball around him all of the time. When he's in centre bounce, that's really all he is a centre bounce midfielder. And you have to have more dynamic options than that, especially when you've got players like Serong and Brayshaw, who JL is working on other parts of their game. With Brayshaw, they've developed the outside game even more with the wing stuff they've done over the last few years. They're trying to put Serong forward so they don't just have to rest him on the bench, but they can have him as a dangerous option inside forward 50. I just don't think Erasmus offers them anything. And with, I think, Murphy Reid, who we'll talk about, I think he might have passed him. Definitely O'Driscoll has. Johnson had more than a year ago, let alone when we throw a Young or a Fife in. I'm sorry, Neil. It's just not going to happen here. I love the desire to want to make it work. I think if he's going to have an AFL career forged out, it is going to need to be elsewhere. It's time to move him off your team. Murphy Reid is the other cash cow we got to talk about. He looks super composed. His skill set is absolutely sublime. I remember talking to Dylan Alexander, who have had a guest on this channel a couple of times, about him, and he's like, MJ, just when this guy gets ball, whether it's in space or not, he just creates. He sets up space for himself and his teammates beautifully, and he does not make a bad decision. I think there's a world where he does debut this first round with no Hayden Young that creates another option. I do think he's got Vest all over him, but when Fremantle get their best 23, I just don't think there's a spot for him, unfortunately. I'd love there to be, but I just don't think there's a spot for him. I probably should talk about Shai Bolton too. I know the SuperCoach community, maybe more than the AFL Fantasy community, have been considering this one. Yes, a couple of goals, and yes, centre bounce presence, so tick on both of those regards. But are we going to venture into this forward space that's got a risk profile? Yeah, the fixture's nice. Yeah, the role looks good. But I think with Horne-Francis, with Rankin, with Bailey Smith, with McRae, with Caleb Daniel, with Garcia, with Riley Sanders, with Stone, with Davidson, are you really going to fade out in those mid-range options? Bolton getting ahead of him? Just don't think you're going to do that. I'd rather, again, trade into him. If a Rankin goes bad, if a Bailey Smith goes bad, no, I don't think either of those will, but if they do, we are going to want outlets. And if Bolton pops early, yes, he can make you some bank. Yes, the fixture's great, but I do think the speed of ball movement, yes, even though he's got centre bounces, he's still going to need a handful of goals to really pop a big ceiling. It's possible in the starting few games of the year, but yeah, I just think I'm trying to force something. Draft is a different story. I think he's a really nice option there on your draft board. Daily fantasy, I think he's a nice guy to pick as a ceiling scorer. But in classic, to pick him, you've got to fade one of these others. And while it does create separation, I'm always a fan of at least considering it. I think it might be a forced separation rather than a natural one that sits there. But what's your take on the Dockers and the Demons? Who stood out for you? If you're watching this on YouTube, comment below and let me know. Very keen on your takes on which of these two teams and the players that played are going to pop for you. I talked right at the start about Max Gawn being the R1. Do you agree with that take? If not, comment below and let me know. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast and you haven't given us a 5-star rating yet, come on, friend. We've been giving you an episode every single day of the preseason. You've got to jump in and help us out with a 5-star rating. Also inside the description of this episode is a bunch of different links. You can check out all the handles for where you can follow us across social media. It's got the links for where you can get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch. It'll arrive a couple of weeks into the preseason, but you look good, whether it be a hoodie like the one I'm wearing now. There's T-shirts, there's caps, there's notebooks. There's a bunch of other stuff. It is a way to look good and to support the Coaches Panel at the same time. And speaking of supporting the Coaches Panel, we'd love for you to join our Patreon. They have been getting a ton of great conversations flowing this pre-season. There is a tier that is right for you, and at every tier level, there is a different reward that comes your way just for signing up, let alone the benefit of becoming a Coaches Panel supporter. Our breakout tier and our premium tiers get our draft ranks for free. Otherwise, you can buy them in the Patreon shop direct if you don't want to get involved in that. You're just like, I just want your ranks and then I want to just nick off. That's fine. We'll be okay with that as well. If you want to get your hands on any of those ways to support the Coaches Panel, they're in the description of this episode. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. Community Series done. Opening round a handful of days away. What can you expect from the Coaches Panel from now before round one? And here is what's coming. You're going to get at least 2 strategy episodes where we look through what we have learned, heard, observed, and what we need to unpack now that we have got a bunch of variable games. I'll drop my best 22 for AFL Fantasy projected and my best 23 for SuperCoach. I'll let you see my pre-opening round team. Yep, a team reveal for AFL Fantasy and for SuperCoach. We've got our final Q&A of the pre-season, plus a bunch of other special things. Every single day before round one, we are going to give you at least 1 episode a day. Please make sure you subscribe. Please make sure you're locked in. It has been the biggest and best pre-season from the Coaches Panel so far, and we have still got a ton of stuff to give you to help you with your fantasy side heading into round one.